finally, can we have Mr. Loftus come up, our faculty advisor, come introduce himself? This is his first crew meeting of the semester.
Yeah, it is, actually. I'm doing a pretty good job. Actually, I just finished a class, so.
Oh, there you go.
My name is Charles Loftus. I'm the faculty advisor for crew. My role here at ASU is I teach at the criminal justice program, either downtown and west. The classes I teach are domestic terrorism, international terrorism, jihadism, martyrdom, intelligence, and a bunch of regular criminal justice classes as well. I also take a group to Israel every year for counterterror training, ASU students. So this is our 12th year of doing that. And so we're real pleased that we have a very robust counterterror program here at ASU, and at a coincidence, my domestic terrorism class is on Mondays and Wednesdays, and we were talking about anarchist. Today's Wednesday, Monday and Wednesday. So we finished it up today and continued on. And it's an interesting aspect of society. It's been around for over 100 years, and so I think this could be a very valuable presentation. We'd love to hear that, especially on a walk away type of viewpoint now. For those of you who don't know, I walked away from the Democratic Party many years ago, 8 years ago, in 2008. I was a lifelong Democrat, and I walked away and joined the Republican Party in 2008. So I have a retrospect of the days as a Democrat and the values, and so I enjoy hearing how people admit internally and externally that they've had a change of heart and how they learn and move to another direction. So the youngsters, maybe you have a change of heart and change later on. That's fine. It's just a matter of who you are and where you feel you're at in your life. In today's society, we enjoy here in academia the freedom of speech. I tell my classes, I have some very volatile subjects in my classes. We were talking about the Charleston shooting today. That was a hate crime on African Americans. Clearly targeted an African American church, and this individual's filled with hate. And when he was talked about it, even when he was sentenced, he said he wished he could do more. Essentially, he had no regrets and he wanted to go kill more. So when we talk about these subjects here in academia, this is the place where, if anywhere, we can talk about these subjects. Even if they encroach on our personal space where they make us feel a little uncomfortable, that's good, because this is the area and the time of your life where that's really important. And this concept of freedom of speech is so important. We need to be able to talk this out, because look how polarized society is. I hate you because you do this. I hate you. That word is just so strong. Just look at our society. It's way over here and way over there. And I'm going to fight you no matter what. When we should be talking like, how can we find the areas that we agree upon to make society better? How much resources are we wasting on all this fighting? So I applaud this presentation. I'm looking forward to it. And if there's anything I can do for you, either go through your committee here or come to me directly. My cell phone is always on. I only answer before 8 p.m. I'm an old guy. I go to bed about 8. But other than that, I'm here to help. So whatever you need, folks. So thank you for this opportunity.
Well, thank you guys. Okay, so you get about 45 minutes to talk, and then we do 30 minutes for questions.
Sure.
Sweet.
Alright, well, thank you for having me, everyone. I want to get a sense of the room. Is there any liberals in the room here? Anyone? It's okay.
Is there what?
Any liberals? Oh, sorry. No one? That's a liberal, I hope. Okay, so it's mostly conservatives, that's fine. I've been in a couple of rooms where I've been able to speak to some liberals, which is fine, but you guys are all mostly, I assume, on the conservative side, or maybe libertarian, which is fine too. So then I'm gonna ask a question that's probably gonna see a lot of hands raised. How many of you have ever been afraid to speak out? Quite a few of you. When I was in school, I remember time and time again biting my tongue, afraid to speak out. Because I knew that if I said something that went against what the professor was teaching or what the class was saying, that I was going to be chastised and that I was going to be there alone. It's not a nice feeling. But it really, really was not always like that. I used to be a member of the liberal class. I used to be a member of Antifa. I used to hate America so much that I did some pretty crazy things. And I'm about to talk to you guys about that. That's exactly what I'm about to talk to you guys. I'm going to talk to you guys about Antifa and their violent ideology that seeks to silence anybody who dares to have an original thought. Now, you may be thinking that liberal bias is only happening in certain universities. You always hear about Berkeley, you hear about Yale, Columbia, all these major universities. But it happens all around the country. It even happens here. ASU is a major university as well, but even in colleges nearby that may not be as big, we're seeing the same type of silencing of conservatives. It is not just happening in one place. It's happening throughout the country. Not only that, but these type of vigilante tactics are actually infiltrating our government. If you actually look at the halls of Congress, you're beginning to see the same tactics that we're seeing on the classroom and in the halls of every single major university. So first, what I want to talk to you guys is about my story, where I come from, and then I want to talk to you guys about why I joined Antifa. After that, I really want to talk to you guys about how I left Antifa, and then about some of the activism that I did as a conservative activist. And then hopefully I can end with talking about how the importance of the things that you guys are doing as a club. Well, I started becoming involved in politics in 2009. Who here remembers the governor of California in 2009? He was a famous actor. Arnold Schwarzenegger. Yeah, the governor. So I was involved at the time, and I remember being involved because there was a teacher, my favorite teacher, who was about to get fired, and she got a pink slip, and I thought that's not fair. So I decided to go out into a protest, and I thought this is how you make change. But it wasn't really until 2010 that I really started wanted to make a difference. So in 2010, I hated America so much that I decided that I did not want to stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. And a lot of times I felt like this guy, thinking I was standing up against this administration and I was there alone. But honestly, a lot of times I used to look a little bit more like this guy. It's funny because you're supposed to be this rebel, yet you wear the uniform that a rebel is supposed to wear. I was just eager to make my mark and what I thought was going to be a good thing. Now, of course, I didn't stand for the Pledge of Allegiance, so what ended up happening, I got in trouble. I was written a referral that was so harsh that my vice principal had no idea what that type of referral was. But I went home that day, and I read the Constitution for the very first time. I opened it to the First Amendment. And the irony is not lost on me that even though I hated America, I was using its laws to defend myself. And this is the way the left thinks, unfortunately. And I should make a distinction. I don't think all liberals do this. So whenever I say the left, I'm thinking about the nasty left who want to silence you. There's very good liberals. I have some friends who are liberals, and that's perfectly fine. We can disagree. But when the left is the type of people who will use any argument so long as it favors them and it doesn't favor you. So the next day, I went home. I went back to school, and I talked to my administrator, and I told her, hey, I'm thinking about suing. That is the very first time I remember seeing like somebody in power, like scared. It took less than 24 hours before I was back in class, and like nothing ever happened. And my teacher, who got me in trouble, he was mad. She just had to shut up. She couldn't say a thing. And unfortunately, in my school, there was a lot of teachers who felt like this, who conservative teachers were afraid to speak out. By the time I was a senior in high school, I decided to do my community service. Who here did a community service project for high school? What did you do?
We did, because it was right after the Parkland shooting, so we did a yard sale to raise money to give it to them. So that's what we
That's
did.
beautiful. I saw another hand over here. What did you do?
I did something called Miracle League. Basically, kids with mental disabilities, and physical disabilities, playing baseball. We did everything from Halloween events to just games and stuff like that.
That's beautiful. You know what I did? I convinced a teacher to count political activism as my community service. And it didn't take much convincing, because this teacher was a biology teacher. He was supposed to talk to you about like mitochondria and how that's the powerhouse of the cell. But when you would go to his class, he would start telling you why you need to be atheist and how his kids were not stupid because they didn't believe in God. He was very happy to sign off on my community service and tell people that what I was doing was good. In his mind, radical activism that I was doing, and I got credit for, was a public service. One of the things that I did, I was definitely against the war. Back in 2010, I think, yeah, no, 2012 at this point. I was definitely against the war, and I thought that the war was for oil. So every single time that the U.S. Army, the U.S. Marines, the U.S. Navy would come to school to try to recruit, talk to people, I'd stand next to them. And they'd be there with signs, and I would shame them just for wearing the uniform. Unfortunately, there was so many teachers who were very happy to help me with my political activism. Yet, all the conservative teachers, who I later found out they were there, they're still afraid to speak out. Because the norm, even in high schools, is that conservatives are afraid to speak out, otherwise they'll lose their jobs. But now, you may be wondering, why do I hate America? I was doing some pretty nasty things. Well, the truth is, there's quite a few different reasons I hated America. First off, I was Mexican. Well, I am Mexican, I should say. I was born here in Chimalhuacan. If you ever look up in Chimalhuacan, Mexico, you will not find it because you can't spell it. But if you were able to finally to type it in, you'll find that Chimalhuacan, Mexico was nicknamed the trash can of Mexico City. This is a more modern picture. And it's a little bit grainy, but there's a lot of trash. There's a more modern picture. So when I came to America back in 2003, I struggled learning a new language. So a lot of the TV I watched was in Spanish. So I believed the media propaganda that President Bush was the devil. That he hated Mexicans. Even though President Bush was actually a very big proponent of immigration reform to try to help immigrants, both undocumented and documented here in America. Now, we're in the Southwest. Who has ever heard of Univision and Telemundo? Quite a few of you. Which is good, because you guys understand this. If you think that CNN is propaganda and it's fake news, then you really have not watched Telemundo and Univision. I grew up watching this kind of stuff. Let me give you guys an example. A few months ago actually, but leading up to the 2018 election, I was at the restaurant for my in-laws, and in the background they were playing TV, just like a lot of Mexican restaurants do. And leading up to 2018, there was a lot of partisan commercials, just left and right. And then one of the commercials I saw was this one. Let's watch it for a second. You are listening to the cries of children at the border right now. And then they're blaming 3 Republican congressmen in California, and she hasn't even been elected. She hasn't done anything, including President Trump. This is the type of propaganda that they kind of play on their channel. Remember to vote. And you know, I'm not even blaming this commercial, because this is a partisan commercial. It's played by a super PAC. They're allowed to say what they want. They're a private company. But no, I'm not talking about this commercial. Just after this commercial was played, there was another one that was advertising the nightly news. And it started with the same emotional appeal, with children at the border. And they ended with saying that, I forgot the name of the news show, but that they were the only ones who were standing up to the Trump administration to protect your rights. The media strategy of Telemundo and Univision is to make Hispanics feel marginalized and that they have nobody there to reach out for them except for the media. That's their branding, that's their bread and butter. That's what they like to push to Hispanic Americans and just Hispanic immigrants in America. Unfortunately, I grew up with all of this propaganda. This is the reason why I hated America, but to really understand why I joined Antifa, I was also a member of the anarcho-punk movement. Have you guys ever heard of punks? Some of you have. So the anarcho-punk movement, a lot of people don't think of it too big, just because it's just a bunch of kids like playing music. But in the 80s and the 90s, they were the ones, in Antifa, they were inseparable. They were two sides of the same coin. In the late 2000s, I remember going to a lot of shows, going to a lot of gigs, and this is where I met a lot of people who were part of Antifa. Nowadays, both the anarcho-punk movement is not the same as like Antifa. They've kind of parted ways and kind of recruited people into it. But I've met a lot of people who joined just because of the punk movement, or some of them joined because of many other causes. So let's go ahead and look at what Antifa actually is. So, Antifa. The first thing to remember is that it's not an organization. A lot of people say that Antifa member, and I speak in terms of being a former Antifa member because that's what people understand. But if you really want to look at Antifa, it is not an organization. It does not have leadership. It does not have members of any kind. What it's made up of multiple different organizations. So under the Antifa banner, you have the Animal Liberation Front, the Black Rose Society, the American Black Cross, the Young Democratic Socialists of America are the newest ones to come into the fold. They're a student arm of the the Democratic Socialists of America. They're pretty troubling. They have over 24 different chapters. Over 50 chapters in 24 different states with 2,000 educators throughout the country. Higher education who are actually professing socialism in the classroom. I'm not the only person that I've met who has left Antifa. There was this girl from Michigan. No, she's from Chicago, but she went to school in Michigan. And she told me that this is how she joined. She joined as the Democratic Socialists of America. Then you also have a lot of different groups that you might see on campus, such as Mecha. Mecha is a big one. A lot of the members, not necessarily, if you're part of Mecha or these groups, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to be part of Antifa, but this is where a lot of them come from. So now, let's look at a little bit about the history of Antifa. So, Antifa has its roots going back to the 1940s. And it came as a rise against the Nazi Germany and the rise of fascism in Italy. At the time, they liked to think of themselves as great revolutionary heroes, that they were there fighting fascism. But if you really look at the history, it was just a political faction. Just like the Nazis, just like the socialists. They were a faction that they were vying for political power. And anytime you hear about Antifa and they tell you about their roots, they'll pretend that this is where they come from. But they were all wiped out because of fascism. So modern Antifa really has no connection to the old school Antifa. And even if they did, they didn't have any noble causes. They just wanted political power. So now, what are their tactics? Direct action is the name of the game for Antifa. Direct action, for those of you who may not know, is when you literally take matters into your own hands. You don't you don't call the cops, you don't write a letter to your government administrator. You go in and you fight. And this is exactly what I did. This is actually me back in Pomona, California, on November 5th, 2011. The interesting thing, though, is some of the things that I did in Antifa, I'm actually very proud of. For example, this. When this happened, the reason I put on the black mask was because the neo-Nazis were marching down my street. And I went there, and I am so proud that I went and I stood up to Nazis and I yelled at the top of my lungs that their hateful ideology was not welcome in our community. But you know something? I really, really wish that was all I did. Let me tell you a story. It was sometime after this, not too long, a few months after this. About a group of 10 to 15 of us, we went to the home of a CEO in Orange County, California, in Newport Beach. Who's ever been to Orange County? Anyone? It's a beautiful, beautiful place. Homes are amazing. And it's a very quiet community. Went there with about 10 to 15 people, all of us, and we went to the home of a CEO. And this gentleman hadn't really done anything. He was just the CEO of a company that had a contract with a French airline to transport monkeys back to America for animal testing. The problem is that since he left the company, we decided to make him our enemy. So on a weekend, a lovely weekend where he was trying to relax, we would go into his homes, multiple different homes actually, and stand right outside and yell at the top of my lungs the same thing that we were yelling at the Nazis. And the funny thing is that he wasn't home. And the sad part is that we knew that. Because you see, our point to go into his home or to his home was not to try to talk to him and to try to convince him to cut this deal. We were there for the neighbors. We were there to annoy the hell out of the neighbors because we knew when we were gone, he would come back. And his neighbors, his friends, they would come knocking. And they would knock on his door and they would say, you need to listen to them. Because we can't enjoy our homes and our children are learning all these hateful language. If you don't do what they say, then you and I are going to have problems. And this is what Antifa does. Antifa is willing to use any tactic they possibly can in order to silence you into submission. It doesn't matter that they might agree with you on some things. If there's one thing that they disagree on you, they will freeze it and they will tear you down for it. Now, looking at what Antifa does, they have a term for this called, and this is called propaganda by the deed. Propaganda by the deed is literally, again, similar to direct action, taking matters into your own hands and enacting violence against people who you disagree with the one purpose that hopefully the violence will inspire others to take up arms against, with you and basically attack other people. These are not peaceful protesters. A lot of people think that Antifa has both legitimate goals and some illegal goals. No. When they put on the black mask, their goal is to silence people by any means necessary. This is kind of like what they wear. They literally, some of them actually do march around with guns. This is in the groups that I'm about to mention. But the Redneck Revolt actually goes around marching with rifles, and they were present at the Charlottesville. Is it Charlottesville massacre? The guy who drove into it. Charlottesville, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Charlottesville. They were present there. And some of them, there's this one professor from the University of North Carolina in Charlottesville who at the time was proud to say that he was pointing his rifle at neo-Nazis, or what he pretended that they were Nazis. There was definitely hateful people there, but I'm pretty sure he wasn't just pointing his gun at them. Now, for those of you who don't know, the Anarchist Cookbook. Who's ever heard of the Anarchist Cookbook? For a few of you. The Anarchist Cookbook is a book that teaches people how to make guns, drugs, and bombs. And this book is routinely passed around at anarchist book fairs. I've been to several of them, and this is a must-have. They sell it, they pass it out. And this book has been at the home of multiple school shooters, including the Columbine Massacre. And this is just what Antifa kind of reads. Not everybody is actually going to build a bomb, but they're very much capable of, and a lot of them do have the intent to do. So, unfortunately, since Antifa has no leadership, as I mentioned earlier, it really becomes a type of mob rule. Let's take a look at a couple of examples. For example, in Washington, D.C., January 20th of 2017, when Trump was inaugurated, Antifa rioted. 200 members of them rioted. And it cost Washington, D.C. residents over $100,000 in property damage. Let's go to UC Berkeley. And UC Berkeley, February 1st, 2017, just a couple weeks later, Antifa, again, they organized by any means necessary. They caused a riot, causing Northern Californians another $100,000. And now when I throw out these numbers, a lot of people think like, oh, well, the government's gonna pay for that. Whatever, it's not a big deal. It's not true. Antifa doesn't just target government buildings, they target private properties. One of the things that I did as Antifa is I went home one day, from home, in the middle of the night, I walked several hours and I went to McDonald's and I broke the window. I just thought that this was a good way to stick it up to the man. It wasn't until years later that I talked to my dad about this, and he made me realize that breaking a window of a business isn't helping anybody. It's not sticking it to the man. As a matter of fact, it's hurting people. It hurts the workers who are told to go home for the day. It hurts their families whose paychecks are now slightly smaller. Hurts the business owners who now have to spend hundreds, sometimes even thousands of dollars to fix their businesses. And it hurts the customers who sometimes have to pay more because businesses have to increase the prices to make up for the losses. Destruction of property hurts real people. Unfortunately, from my experience in Antifa, I've realized that a lot of them tend to be college age. I wasn't college age, and there's definitely a spectrum of who is actually part of Antifa, but a lot of times it is either professors or college students. Let's look at this example of this video. Be careful because you will miss it if you don't. You go right, you go right. You go. Oh, he's bleeding. Yo. Hey, man, he's bleeding. Hard. Turns out, the guy who hit him was a professor of philosophy. His name was Eric Clanton at Diablo Valley College in Northern California. This gentleman was facing almost 11 years in prison. He was facing 3 felonies and 11 years in prison. Ultimately, he only got 3 years probation. And most recently, maybe you guys saw this a couple of months ago. This is from Portland, Oregon. Go! This is journalist Annie Neal. He's a conservative fellow, to be fair, but for the most part, he wasn't writing opinion pieces. He was just reporting about Antifa. And so he was reporting the truth about them. Antifa hated him. And the interesting thing about this video is that if you notice, one person recognizes him, but I bet you anything that everybody who attacked him, not everyone who attacked him actually knew who he was. Antifa, again, is a form of mob rule. So if one person attacks somebody and then another person sees, well, I guess he's the enemy, let's attack him. And it piles on and on and on. He had a hemorrhage, a brain hemorrhage, and he had to go to the hospital, the ER. A lot of times, people say, like, Antifa hasn't killed anyone. Well, it's not for lack of trying. And unfortunately, this isn't just some professors or some people going out in the streets. They have a philosophical background, and there's professors out there who are encouraging this type of behavior. This is Mark Bray from Dartmouth University. He's a lecturer there. Yesterday, he was at Buffalo University, encouraging more people to go out in the streets and join Antifa. In his book, he rejects the basic notion of that America was founded on. The idea that if you can say what you want, and it doesn't matter if I agree with it, I will fight to the death to protect it. In his first few pages, he rejects this idea. And not only that, but he openly admits that Antifa isn't just about fighting fascism. They are about fighting anybody who is the extreme right, the alt-right. And unfortunately, that describes anybody who dares to be conservative. And even, to an extent, some liberals. So Antifa is definitely very left. But they're not just attacking conservatives, they're attacking anyone who they disagree with. And you may be thinking, oh, this is only happening, there's only some professors, he's just one. There's multiple. But it doesn't really have a bearing of like American society. Well, this is Keith Ellison. He was a former representative, and he was the vice chairman of the Democratic Party. And he was encouraging people to read this book. Not only that, but right now he's the Attorney General of the state of Minnesota. This isn't some low-level professor at some random community college like we saw in Iowa. It's not just some college student who's making some mistakes and he'll grow out of it. This is a Democratic leader of a major American political party. And he's encouraging the tactics of Antifa. Now, I could go on and on about what Antifa is, and I'm sure you guys have a lot of questions, but I'd really like to tell you guys about, how I became conservative. Let me take you guys to 2012. This is me, back in 2012. I was a senior in high school when these couple things happened. I remember that I was failing my econ class, and I did something that most leftists never do, and I opened my econ book. So, what did I learn? I learned a lot of really cool things. I was introduced to these two gentlemen. Who here knows them? You do. It's Milton Friedman and Thomas Sowell. Unfortunately, Milton has passed a few years ago, but Thomas Sowell is still alive. He's at the Hoover Institute, or actually, he just retired from the Hoover Institute at Stanford University. Now, I was introduced to these ideas, but I can tell you that I didn't agree with them. I just found them interesting. So what I really wanted to do is I wanted to talk to people about it. So I started talking to people about it, and who did I talk to? Well, my friends. And who were my friends? Well, a bunch of other members of Antifa. You know, for being an anarchist, that was the very first time that I was ever called a capitalist pig. Unfortunately, they don't just do it to attack people they disagree with. They use a lot of slurs, and they'll attack anybody to keep them in line. Now, again, I need to remind people, I was not conservative simply because I opened my econ book. What I did have was a lot of questions. So I started going online. I went online and requested information from a lot of different sources. And no one replied to me until Adam from the Leadership Institute, who had the same job that I actually have right now. And he asked me if I wanted to start a Young Americans for Liberty chapter, which is a great organization. They have chapters all over the country. And I said, sure, I'll start that. I want to talk to people. And you know how I used to talk to people on the left, and I used to come at them from like libertarian and conservative arguments. Well, I did the same thing with Adam. I used to talk to him about leftist ideas. And you know what's the one thing he never did? He never once called me a communist pig. And this is exactly what I was looking for, because good ideas don't need any violence to succeed. We should be able to talk about ideas, especially in the college campuses. As a matter of fact, this is why I was so excited to start college, and why I started a Young Americans for Liberty chapter. Not necessarily because I was libertarian, but because I was really excited to finally get to school and talk to open-minded people about the importance of ideas and how we could build a better society. And boy, was I wrong, because as soon as people found out I was part of YAL, people hated me. Student government hated the hell out of me. And I hated them back too, it's cool. One time, I decided to kind of protest some of the things that they were doing, because they were violating the Brown Act, which is a California open meetings rule. And I decided to call them a bunch of communists, and I knew that a lot of them liked My Little Pony, so I made something that looks a little bit like this.
Jesus.
It's just something I made together. I put their logo. It wasn't anything. I didn't make either of this. I just kind of put the collage together. Oh gosh, when I did this, I remember just being there, people taking pictures, some people laughing, but it wasn't until the student government advisor walked out, and she took a picture of me. She took a picture of the poster I had. And then I was getting a little nervous. I walked up to her and I said, "Oh, it's pretty funny, right?" She just responded, "Well, we'll see how funny the lawyers think this is." Now at this point I'm freaking out, because I'm about to get sued. And I'm thinking, who do I call? Like, I don't have money to hire a lawyer. And even if I did, this money I could have used for my education. I could have used to buy books to just enjoy myself. Yet I was going to be spending thousands of dollars to be able to defend myself for something that I knew was covered under the First Amendment. I was just dissenting against a government agency, which is a student government agency, and they still wanted to shut me down for it. And I got so lucky, because they did not copyright their own logo. So they had absolutely no case against me. But at that point, we realized that they were willing to do anything, including using the power of the state to silence us. So we got in touch with the Foundation for Individual Rights in Education, and we decided to file suit. Now, back in high school, one of the things that I tried doing, I threatened to sue the school. And at the time, people thought I was really cool. When I was walking to class, people said they were so excited that I was able to stand up to the man. They wished I had the same courage. When we sued Citrus College, it was not the same thing. Student government hated us. We gave them another reason. The trustees, which I'm pretty sure, I can't confirm, but I'm pretty sure they hired a spy to spy on all of our activities, because we always saw this gentleman with a really nice camera taking pictures of all of our activism projects on multiple different days. Then, the student paper, they pretend to be unbiased, but in their front page they had something like this. Now, you guys might have seen the free speech balls, giant beach balls where people write something in support of free speech. We stopped walls before we got smart and started buying balls. So we had multiple different layers of people just writing things on it, and decided to print when somebody criticized us and someone called us a moron. Oh, they didn't like us. They pretended to be unbiased, but any chance they could, they would write a piece which portrayed us in a negative light. The only help that we got while we were there was from the outside. Everybody in school hated us. But screw them, because we won. We won $110,000. We did not see a penny of this, because it goes to the lawyers. They don't tell you that, but but it was really exciting because we were finally able to assert our rights. And it's funny because Citrus College had been sued twice. We sued them for the second time. They were first sued in 2005 for the very same thing. And I decided to join or to start a Young Americans for Liberty because I wanted to meet more people. Not because I was libertarian, but I just wanted to talk to people. And I found libertarian ideas interesting. But the reason I really became conservative was because I found that the left on campus wanted to silence me, just like I used to try to silence others. Unfortunately, this is not just happening in a small little community college world like I went to. It's happening throughout the country. And mind you, the college I went to is actually in a conservative district in Los Angeles. Glendora, California is a conservative place, yet it was happening there. It's no surprise why it's also happening in places like Tulane University. In Tulane University, members of Young Americans for Liberty and Turning Point USA, they were doxxed. And if you don't know what doxing is, it's when somebody puts your private information online or in the public with the intent that someone will cause you harm. Well, members of Turning Point and Young Americans for Liberty were doxxed, and someone tried burning down their dorm. Again, Antifa has not killed anybody, but not for lack of trying. And on the subject of fire, let's go to a university in Washington where a banner that was just out there, just doing its own thing, maybe kind of like this, they just burned it down. And then it's funny because in this campus, we certainly know that there was professors involved because every time this pro-life club did anything on campus, there was always professors and students there ready to protest them. As a matter of fact, they had an event where they were chalking on the floor, and professors and students were taking turns erasing the chalk. Let's go to the other side of the country, and let's go to Massachusetts, in Assumption College. Well, Assumption College had to cancel an event because the mere threats of Antifa protesting made them realize that they could not afford another Berkeley incident. $100,000. They could not afford that. And it's not just happening in the college campuses. Who here remembers how they treated Kavanaugh? Let's look at some of that video for a quick second.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I therefore...
This is called deplatforming. And it is when you go up there to an event and try to silence them so that you get them off the stage. This happens a lot in the halls of Congress. And the thing about Congress is that they're lucky. They have a sergeant at arms. The sergeant at arms was just keep kicking people out. No big deal. But when this happens in college campuses, a lot of times college students can't afford security. And oftentimes they make students pay thousands of dollars in order to just have a police officer outside or just patrolling. This is a recurring problem that we've been finding. That sometimes Antifa will show up to events, and then even then police at certain universities, like in Portland State University, a police officer refused to kick out members of Antifa when they were disrupting one of their meetings. Now, let's see, who here remembers this video? That's Hayden Williams. I was his boss throughout this whole thing. When he got punched in the face, I saw the video before anyone else. And I remember being on the phone with him and just thinking, and I remember Hayden begging me to not make his name public. We were trying to figure out how we could write the story because we knew that it was going to come out eventually, but we wanted to get in front of it so Hayden's name wouldn't be out in the public. Unfortunately, somebody else had a different angle and then they identified him, so we weren't able to do that. Fortunately for Hayden, this led to this. He got to meet President Trump. And then him and I both went to the White House to witness executive order in support of his speech. But unfortunately, that doesn't happen with everybody. Right after he got punched in the face, there was a fallout on campus. And there was professors who were advocating for more violence against their students. There was a professor who said that, oh, the MAGA kids just got punched in the face. That makes me so happy. We gotta kick them off campus. Could you imagine being a college student and seeing that, being open about conservative beliefs and seeing professors who are supposed to take care of you and they're supposed to be your mentors saying that it's okay if you get attacked because you believe in a conservative value?
And what they did. But you take a step back and you're like, wait, they kind of just stood there and smiled and there's a guy hitting a drum in their face. And we like forget what side we're on, forget what really happened.
Black lives matter, black trans lives matter. This is fascism, you're all fascists.
This is Indianism.
Just so you know, the second gentleman who was in there, he was throwing stick bombs inside, trying to force everybody out of the room.
Hey, we welcome you here. We're not bad. Come here. We welcome you in. You're welcome.
So, I was right outside, and let me kind of give the layout of the land. This classroom was about the size of this classroom, and it was on the 8th floor, I think, or the 10th floor, and it had a little balcony outside, which is kind of cool. I didn't want to take up a seat from all the other college students, so I decided to just stand outside and just watch through the window. As soon as I heard something, I decided to pull out my phone and start recording. Unfortunately, I didn't hit record fast enough, so I didn't get to catch when the incident happened. But as the first gentleman was walking outside, he saw me and he punched me. And luckily, I was able to put up my arms, and like a good California boy that I am, I'm just like, dude! But I was in shock. I was like, wow, like, this guy just attacked me. I grabbed Hayden and I was like, hey, like, let's get this guy, let's follow this guy, because, like, you don't get to just assault people and batter people and then get away with it. So I pulled out my phone and started calling the dispatch of campus security, and I was telling them what's going on, as we were following this guy down the stairs. Fortunately, what we didn't realize is that the second gentleman who you saw there was actually following us. So as he was following us, he was trying to catch up to us, trying to like scare us and make it seem like he was gonna attack us. And he was saying, let's go to a dark corner. Let's go settle this, come on. Just like thinking, dude, I just came for an event. Then finally we got into this little quad on campus, and Hayden was right in front of me. And the second guy, he squared up to Hayden and started yelling at him and just started punching Hayden in the face, trying to get him to the floor. I was still on the phone with the police when this all happened. And I went up to them and I pushed the other guy off of Hayden, and then he took off running. And we were like, damn, like, what do we do? We didn't really know where the second guy went, but we decided to go towards the first guy. And finally we made it to a main street. The main street, we were so lucky because there was a few officers there. And one of them, we flagged her down, and she came out of her car, and she just started running after them. And they tackled him to the floor. And as he was being tackled on the floor, they put him in handcuffs. He started fighting back and then realized that it was actually the police, so he stopped. And then, while in handcuffs, he had the audacity to say, why am I in handcuffs? They're the fascists. Just really shows you where their mind is. You could attack somebody, and their state of mind, what they're doing is supposed to be self-defense. But they're not doing that. I was just there trying to record. I wasn't doing anything. He just attacked me. And I pressed charges against him. And I felt bad for that. Because that same night, I was thinking about it, and we were just kind of like, we went to go eat later, a couple of friends, and Hayden and I went to eat. And I'm just thinking, wow, that kid is sitting in jail right now. He's like 19, 20 probably. And I had thought about that for a couple months. Then finally I got a letter from the district attorney in Los Angeles, and he told me, hey, we need you to show up to court. And I was having second thoughts. I'm like, maybe I should retract it. I mean, this guy didn't hit me. Well, I mean, he hit me, but he didn't really attack me. It wasn't like Hayden, I didn't get a black eye. He just hit me, but it's not like it hurt. But then I realized, after talking to the district attorney, that you have to press charges. Because if I hadn't done that, he would have been having pizza with his friends that same night. Excited, telling his friends, like, yeah, I had 2 people like that night. It's not a big deal, I'm fighting a fascist. If you don't report it, and as the district attorney told me, his job is to prosecute people, to make sure that, to deter them from doing the same act again, or from discouraging others to do the same. It's still going through the judicial process right now. I have to check back in on that, but I wish I could tell you the end of that. Last I've heard is that the administration itself was looking into it as a separate issue. But it's really scary because it's not the first time that I've seen violence with my own eyes. I'm not the only one who's been attacked. I know plenty of students. And I've been present when somebody has like stabbed our property, or like just like thrown our property like over. Some people sometimes break our signs, they steal it. I have a friend who, his name's Mark, at UC Davis. He was pushed around and like just basically like handled like all around by some other people. And it's a scary feeling because when I go on campus, I'm not trying to get punched. I'm not trying to get assaulted by somebody. But the job that I'm doing is important. The job that Rick is doing is important. This is why we're out there, because if that's what it takes to further the conservative movement and to fight for free speech, then we're gonna be out there. I seldom tell my story. A lot of times I never really told my story. As a matter of fact, I was silent about it for about 6 years, until a few months ago that I saw them on the news and I told my boss, I'm like, yeah, I used to do that. And it was weird just to kind of look back on all my mistakes, but I had the perfect start to a liberal career if I was still a leftist. I'm an immigrant. I face hardships. I know what it feels to be homeless. I know what it feels to be hungry. But I decided to be a conservative because I saw that the left wasn't about caring. It was, if you didn't agree with them, they were trying to silence you in any way possible. Antifa's extreme tactics, because not everybody I showed you is necessarily a member of Antifa, but their extreme tactics are encouraging others to take up arms and to actually attack people. And we need to not tolerate this type of behavior. If you ever face anything like I showed you, if there's a professor or an administrator or other college students who are trying to silence you, get evidence of it and send it to us, because we will try our best to make sure that they either get prosecuted if it rises to criminal activity or shame them for being biased. Because it's not okay when professors and people in authority try to silence you. It's not okay. But at the same time, as conservatives, because everybody here is a conservative or a libertarian, you have a very, very big responsibility. And unfortunately, I don't see that. I see way too many conservatives not living up to their responsibility, and the responsibility to bring ideas to the table. We can't just stand here and call free speech. That's a great idea, but what else do you have? And when you offer these ideas, don't troll people, because if you start trolling people, then you give them a great argument why free speech is bad. Sure, trolls should be allowed to have free speech, but we need to be cognizant that we need to bring a serious idea to the table, not just do things for the sake of triggering the lids. We shouldn't do that. You know, the crazy thing is that when I did all these things, I wasn't even 18. I really wish I could go back to the home of that CEO. I don't know his name, and I don't know where he lives. But I wish I could go and apologize to him. I wish I could find out what McDonald's I broke that window and I could pay it back. I don't know. The best way I know is to just pay it forward and just to talk to people about the mistakes that I've done, to make sure that they don't do the same. But I also really want to be the same person that Adam was. Adam was a very influential person in my life because he took the chance to talk to me. Even though I disagreed with him, he decided to actually engage me in conversation. This is the type of people we have to be. If you see somebody from the left, don't just attack them or don't criticize them, invite them. You know, there's a common joke about first-year psychology students who they think that they took like a basic psychology class and now they know everything about human behavior. This is pretty much true for any first-year college student. They think that they're an expert in their field because they took a first-year like introductory course. And I think that that's really what's happening in American college campuses. My mom once told me that some people, they get so smart that they start acting dumb. They're blinded to all of the possibilities, all other possibilities except for what they believe. You know, you're only in college. And President Obama once said something that I absolutely love. And he said that feel free to disagree with somebody, but just don't try to shut them up. Again, you're only in college. And after college, you're only human. You're going to make a lot of mistakes. Hell, I made a lot of mistakes, a lot of them which I told you about right now. But don't let your mistake be silencing others. Don't let that be your mistake. Well, thanks. If you guys want to reach out to me, I'm more than happy to talk to you guys.
You guys have any questions for him?
All right, I got one. So you say that Antifa has no leadership. However, during the Gamergate years, we found out that Yvette Flarka was in charge of BAM, and there were a whole bunch of people that, older people, like 40s, 50s, that were continuously showing up in videos of, we weren't calling them Antifa at that point, but various feminist and other left-wing
As I
protests.
mentioned, Antifa has no leadership, but we have to look at what Antifa is made of. And it's made of a lot of legitimate organizations. By Any Means Necessary being one of them. It was established in 1992 in Berkeley, I believe. And they were fighting for, what were they fighting for? Affirmative action, because they were trying to ban it at the time, which they eventually did ban. But there's a lot of groups. The reason I got involved into like Antifa wasn't because I was against Nazis, because I mean I was, and I still am, but that's not how I joined. I actually joined for animal rights. I was part of animal rights groups and for pro-conservation groups. And those kind of groups do have leaderships. But then there's kind of like this word of mouth, this kind of call to action. So I think of Antifa as like a verb, where people actually put on the black mask and they go out there and they kind of abandon any idea that they had. And they have one common goal. Whoever the enemy is at that point, well, we have to shut them down by any means necessary. So you'll find leaders, but not leaders of actual Antifa.
Yeah, well, also, these people were, I don't think anybody ever actually identified who they were, but they kept showing up at all of these different colleges and effectively organizing the protests and such.
I'd have to look at specifically each one. I mean, there's always an instigator, but I wouldn't call them as much as like an instigator. I wouldn't really call them a leader as much as instigators, like who kind of go around in their community. Is there any other questions? Back there?
Okay, it's about the college educators. It's like, you said that's what's surprising. Isn't there like, I don't know what it's like here, a duty of care, that's the legal term. Is there some, or like say in the city council, for instance, I think they were trying to get rid of someone because of his private life kind of business. So I mean, I'm wondering how can these people who are meant to be, caring, opening young minds, aren't they scared of losing their positions?
So it's a really interesting position. Who here heard a couple of weeks ago a professor from a college in Iowa who was fired, or because he said that he was part of Antifa? No one's heard? Okay, so a few weeks ago there was this professor at I forget the name, it was in Iowa. And he just made a comment publicly that he was Antifa, and there was an outrage, and people wanted him out. And then he wasn't fired. There's an email that he resigned because of all of this. But the Foundation for Individual Rights and Education, the ones who helped me, they were interested in this case, and now he's thinking about suing because he's basically he has the right of free speech as well. I actually wrote an op-ed saying that professors have a standard of duty, a standard of care that's higher than your private citizen. Because yes, you're a private citizen, but I forget the court case. But there's a court case that says that that public employees actually assume more responsibilities. And they have free speech if it concerns, what do they call it? If it's a matter of public concern, and if it's a matter of public concern, then the employer, in this case the university or the government agency, has to weigh his free speech versus whether that kind of speech is going to disrupt the workplace. And my basic argument is that when professors are actually advocating for violence, even though it's not imminent, because that's the basic test for anyone. If you're advocating for violence, it's free speech as long as it's not imminent. But for professors, their free speech directly affects the students who are they're supposed to teach. As a matter of fact, 73% of conservative students have said that they felt that they couldn't write, they had to hide their beliefs in the college campus. And I think this is a disservice because as government actors, they have the duty to make sure that they're being unbiased to all of their students. They can have a public opinion about anything. Hell, I want to one day be a professor, and then one day I want to come in and say, yes, I'm a conservative, and that's okay. But what they don't have the right to do is to make it so people are afraid to speak out and go against them. And unfortunately, there's so many liberal teachers that if you write a paper that's conservative, leaning to the right, you get a bad grade. And it's really unfortunate because they hide behind this qualified immunity because it's very subjective. So, in my opinion, if there's a professor who is at a public university who's advocating for violence, even though it's not imminent, it directly affects, it disrupts the workplace, which is to educate students. So I think that we should really be getting rid of professors that are advocating for violence, even though it's not imminent. Question over there.
Just by coincidence, I tell everybody the first class, I'm conservative, and so take it with a spin, wherever I happen to say. My question is this, how do we keep an eye out for Antifa recruitment on campus?
So that's really interesting because it's really word of mouth. This whole Facebook, there's a lot of groups on Facebook, and I've seen, I just think they're so dumb because it's kind of easy to kind of target them. But those are not the people that I'd be concerned with. If there's like Antifa chapters on Facebook, they're just a bunch of loser kids that have nothing better to do. Like the really serious ones that know what they're doing, they don't advertise it. It's very much word of mouth. And it's really difficult. I think that one thing that we could do is to declare Antifa a domestic terrorist organization, because that's not itself would make being part of Antifa wouldn't be necessarily a crime, but it would open a lot of investigative capabilities. So say for example, as I understand it, and you may be better at this since you teach domestic terrorism, but as I understand it, if we were to declare it a domestic terrorist organization, it would give law enforcement the power to, once they get somebody or they arrest somebody, to look into their connections and to really look at their networks and to better map out the network of the organizations, because it's really a lot of peer-to-peer.
What about peripheral organizations, activities on campus, like ALF?
Young Democratic Socialist America.
So those are really, those you really have to be careful about this because Antifa has no legitimate action, legitimate interest, but groups like the Young Democratic Socialists of America have both legitimate interest and some unlawful interest when they do join part of Antifa. So we do have to respect their First Amendment rights, but at the same time, from personal experience, I have found that there's a lot of members who are definitely members of Antifa. Again, I go back to this lady who was from Michigan, and she told me that basically her entire Young Democratic Socialists of America chapter, they all put on the black mask and they were protesting Ben Shapiro, and they were committing criminal acts. They were pulling down fire alarms, like trying to verbally harass people. So it's a little difficult because we do have to. I'm not saying that everybody in Young Democratic Socialists of America is part of Antifa and by extension behaves in terrorist activities, but a lot of them are. So we really need to look at what they're doing and kind of pay attention to them. Because Antifa doesn't have chapters. You have to look at all of the minor organizations and kind of see when they're meeting, why they're meeting, and something we kind of have to start doing. Yes?
Okay, so this question might be kind of like
Go ahead.
complicated, but basically I want to discuss the self-defense aspect, because I feel like a lot of the stuff you show is regarding Republicans or conservatives getting attacked, and we kind of have to just can't do anything. But for example, the case in New York City with the Proud Boys who were defending themselves, and now they're facing up to 30 years in prison for it. That's my thing, is because I feel like a lot of Republicans and conservatives, even verbally, we kind of back down. We try to be like really nice, which we should do, but sometimes that allows them to take advantage of us. And for example, if these Antifa members see that, oh, you can punch them in the face and they're not going to do anything, they're not going to fight back. Do you know what I mean? Like, I feel like
I get that.
Where does the line go?
And I unfortunately have a problem with organizations that are specifically made to fight back against the Proud Boys. I do get the idea of being prepared to defend yourself, but I think the Proud Boys are making things worse, unfortunately. Because as soon as they start organizing, it's a reactionary group to a reactionary group. And when you start thinking in reactionaries, each one starts getting bigger and bigger. And unfortunately, what we've seen at Portland and also in Berkeley, that it's actually, the formation of the Proud Boys has actually made Antifa in Portland stronger. So personally, yes, you should defend yourself if you're in that situation, but we have to really rely on the police, and we also have to put pressure on politicians that refuse to allow the police to arrest people. Like we were putting pressure on the mayor of Portland a few months ago when he basically told his officers to stand down. So, question?
Yeah, so the reaction normally to Democrats would be to have civil discourse and a dialogue when there's an issue that we just don't agree on. And that's the normal response to normal Democrats. Then with the Antifa, they don't want to have a dialogue. They just want to punch you in your face.
Sure.
And then we've had the same thing with the Democratic Socialists of America. So if we're not trolling them, we're not having that dialogue with them, and we don't obviously want to get into a physical confrontation with them, do we just not engage with them? Do we just ignore them? Do we just turn the other cheek with them? Or how would you engage with that kind of element?
Sure, yeah, I mean, if somebody just doesn't want to listen, don't waste your time with them. Go talk to people who are open-minded. Eventually, if you don't confront them and you actually show through your actions that you're building a network, you're building a community, then people kind of start thinking, well, are they really that hateful? Another thing, I think the best way to grow an organization is not by talking about politics. I know we're all political heads here, and we always want to talk about politics, but the way a lot of liberal groups work is by creating a community first. So for example, at the California State University, Northridge, they have a Mecha chapter, and a lot of times they don't even, well, Mecha is supposed to be like fighting for, to reclaim the old Aztec land. And this is all supposed to be Aztec land.
La Raza.
Yeah, La Raza, all that stuff. They rarely talk about that. You know what they do? They host festivals. And they bring a bunch of Mexican food, a bunch of really cool things that makes people want to be part of it. And then they go, and then for like, I don't know, like 10% of that, they're like, oh, we also do this. And I think that conservatives need to start doing this. We need to start holding events that are not politically based, but they are very much just community engaged, and we have people to have fun, and then you get to work for that 10-15% of the time. And you'll find that if you actually have more socials, you're gonna get more people who are willing to do like the political work that is sometimes very difficult for people to do. So, Question back there.
So I wanted to talk about free speech on campus, because
Sure.
I had a class where the teacher it was right before the midterms, the teacher presented as if it was unbiased.
Uh-huh.
Whatever, the teacher gave us a paper, and on the paper had green check marks on the liberals and red X's on the conservatives. And so the teacher was like, here's this unbiased thing that I'll tell you, inform you on who to vote for, and it was completely biased. So what do you do about that?
That kind of stuff is the kind of stuff that you should send over to campus reform. Send it to me personally.
It was over, I don't have it anymore, it was
Yeah,
the last 2
unfortunately, but we like to expose that kind of stuff because a lot of times they're giving credit to, there was a teacher, a professor in my college a few years before I started. And it was during 2005, I think. And he was giving extra credit for people who were writing for anti-war letters to President Bush.
I'm so sorry, I don't want to interrupt.
Sure.
I had actually a teacher who offered extra credit for people who did like these animal rights protests. And the whole class was supposed to be an English class, but it was really about like animals and stuff, and I just thought it was weird.
Yeah, like that shouldn't be, that's not part of the programming.
Yeah.
I mean, I can see a professor saying like, be civically engaged on whatever you want, so long as it's neutral. But when they start saying that you can get extra credit, that's kind of like a form of bribery, like almost, because they're giving you a better grade, not because you're actually doing better in your English class, but because you're doing something for animal rights. And personally, I'm still very much an animal rights advocate. I mean, I volunteer with my wife, and I volunteer at not PetSmart. It's in PetSmart, but
Petco.
no, it's an adoption agency inside PetSmart. I forget what it's called.
Humane Society?
Not the Humane Society, another one. It's very specifically regional to Virginia. I forget what it's called. But anyways, so I do a lot of these things on my own time, but when professors are asking you to do this kind of stuff, especially when it goes outside of the curriculum, like we need to expose them because it shows a bias in the way they're teaching. And they should be reprimanded for that, because that's only like a minor, what you just mentioned. Sometimes it's more. At USC, they were giving extra credit for people who were volunteering for like the Democratic Party, I believe. Or actually, that's Chapman. At Chapman University, they were sending out college students just like extra credit if they were to volunteer for Democratic congressmen or assembly members, I should say. So that's bad. You shouldn't be allowed to do that. Send it to us. Send it to me. Pass it along. We can make a story about it. Any other questions? Yes.
I did the FBI's Civilian Academy, I think is what they call it, something like that. Antifa is all over. They do a whole section on like each part of the FBI, and Antifa is all over the section on domestic terrorism. So
Interesting.
yeah.
I'd love to like learn more about that.
So they don't. Yeah. So they don't. Like they're not officially on their domestic terrorist watch list, but the way the FBI defines domestic terrorism. As far as the boundary of free speech is that once free speech is mixed with violence, then they consider them a domestic terrorist.
Yeah, and I mean.
So there's pictures of them all over
Yeah.
their stuff.
And I mean, Antifa has recently gone on the news, like, so people haven't really heard about the history of Antifa. But if you really look at when they were more insidious, much smaller, there was other acts of violence that were much, much worse. I remember reading anecdotes and hearing stories, like word of mouth, take that with a grain of salt, where they would actually go into the homes of like accused white supremacists. I'm pretty sure they were actual white supremacists, but they would go into their homes and like just beat them up, like, and cause them harm. So people don't really talk about that. They only try to pretend that they're only out in rallies, but they do much more.
Have you seen what they did in Germany during one of the G7s?
Not specifically, but I know that in the 1990s in America, it's
That's where I first heard of it. It was like all the G7, G8 conferences in Seattle and elsewhere.
I've never met anybody from abroad, but one thing that I do remember, when I was in Antifa, actually, I did hear something about abroad. There was on the newspapers that there was a bombing in Mexico City of what do they call it? Just some technology for nanochips. And I heard from word of mouth that it was an Antifa chapter, whatever, a bunch of anarchists who were afraid that the government was actually going to tag people. That's the only time that I've heard like personally heard, and not in the news, that like a foreign organization, but I don't, I mean, word of mouth, I can't really say much more about what they're doing. Anyways, any other questions?
That's it.
We're good?